Absolute Wonder Woman learning about Darkseid is going to be one of the coolest aspects of this story. But one of the things that I want to specify as we get into this is a question that a lot of you guys had, which was what fate befell the character of Io, or Lo. I'm not 100% sure how you pronounce it. For those of you guys who don't know, that was the true Amazon that Wonder Woman met in the last story arc that we covered. She's back in Themyscira, and she's actually the way in which Hippolyta and all those Amazons within Themyscira have discovered that Wonder Woman is alive, which kind of segues us directly into this story, because this initially opens up in the Huron out in Gateway City, which is basically Wonder Woman's base of operations at this point in time. And she's having a conversation with Barbara Minerva. And what Barbara says is that obviously this is a stylized interpretation of Themyscira. How do you imagine it? And Wonder Woman just says, right, for me, it was ever changing. And Barbara asks her, how do you mean? And Wonder Woman says, I only learned the word Themyscira near the end of my time in the underworld. But inside of me, I had known since I was young that I came from somewhere else, that I had lost something. The Wild Isle was my home. Circe was my home. But I yearned for another place that I did not know, a secret that only lived in me. And she says, though she was physically unable to say the word Amazon, Circe was meticulous in my education, finding many ways to point me to it without ever saying the words. And so Barbara asks, right, could she have said Themyscira? And Diana says, perhaps, but there were ears everywhere. When even a goddess like Hecate fears who is listening, you learn to be cautious. Circe felt that Apollo only banning the word Amazon was a trap. Hecate agreed, so they said no words that would raise suspicion. And she says, but Circe and I were always reading, and whatever I was reading, falling in love with, getting lost inside me, that was Themyscira to me. I think, even before I knew its name, that it was ever changing. Now, here's an important thing to understand, because the Absolute Wonder Woman comic has been going on for, 13 or 14 months at this point. It's very easy to forget how all of this started. That Absolute Wonder Woman was, quote-unquote, saved from Themyscira. She was taken and brought down to hell to be raised by Circe. And where it's very easy to look at that and to say that it was essentially a punishment, again, saved might be the better word to use here. And the reason why is because of this concept being re-established, that there were people out there who were looking for her, hunting for her. Now, what that reason was, we didn't know, and we still don't necessarily know. But any instance of anyone speaking the word Amazon outside of Themyscira, a place that has seemingly been cut off from all of creation, it would draw the wrong kind of attention. The other thing that I want to point out here is that in the absence of Lo, that we still have Gia Candy, Etta Candy, and then we have Barbara Minerva. Those are the three women that are basically working alongside Wonder Woman with everything that she has going on, so I wouldn't really call them the help, right? But they provide assistance wherever they can. The issue is that in the middle of this discussion about Themyscira, which Wonder Woman wasn't really able to have with Lo because she was kind of whisked off back to Themyscira too quick for that conversation to unfold, there's a kind of alert that happens by way of the Huron, which says, destroyed an entire casino in Reno. It's still unclear. And then it says, it's some kind of natural or supernatural phenomenon, or perhaps tech of some kind, but we are already, and then it cuts off, because it's really just kind of tapping into news feeds and making Wonder Woman aware of whatever happens to be going on out there in the world. And so this is where you really get to see Kelly Thompson shine as a writer, because what ends up happening is at that point, it switches to Reno, Nevada. Now, this seems arbitrary, and it seems like there's no real reason behind it, but there is a reason, and you'll see what I'm talking about here in a minute. That initially, it says something is wrong here, right? Something unnatural. I can feel the edges of it crackling in the air, right? There's a news reporter that's kind of broadcasting everything. Somebody notices that Wonder Woman's there, but Diana says, by Hecate, what was that? Because there's just kind of like a glimmer, right? Seemingly in this like collapsed building out there. And it says possibly just a live wire, something damaged in the general destruction, but I have that feeling again, not just of charged energy, but something desperate and dark, an ache that feels like a virus, something violent that catches and spreads. And so she just kind of glimpses what looks to be this lightning type figure, which immediately goes to attack her. And Wonder Woman does what she can hand, but she says, trusted friend, I think we're going to need more than blades, right? Because she's literally talking to her sword, and she says, strange, it's unlike me to reach for a weapon so quickly. Perhaps this inescapable feeling of darkness has compromised me in some way already. And so instead of going to attack it, Wonder Woman tries to address it. And she says, apologies, I did not mean to accelerate the situation. Can you understand me? And it simply just lashes out at her and attacks her. And so when she goes to attack back, a howl of pain, or is it anger? And again, she can't seem to overcome this force. It's hard to think clearly. The violence, the anger in my thoughts is palpable. Is this something dark inside of me that is being forced awake, or something dark being forced upon me? And how to know the difference? It treats my attacks as mere inconvenience. As it screams, the interior darkness increases. Something in me tells me to run away or to kill. It's fight or flight, right? This kind of inner instinct. It's like, you either have to kill this thing or you gotta bail, but you can't stay here and talk to it. And at that point, Wonder Woman just says, neither are options. I cannot lose myself. It runs. The aggression I feel makes it all but impossible not to give chase. And so I succumb and I give chase. Is that its plan? Does it even have plans? And so Wonder Woman ends up going back to the Huron and basically meeting with Steve Trevor. Now, Steve Trevor kind of has to bail out, right? He's being recalled back by the army because there are greater things going on out there. We're not really told by Kelly Thompson this is explicitly the case, but one of the things to keep in mind is that while we don't know for certain, seemingly what's happening with Wonder Woman right now is taking place at the same time as everything in Absolute Batman and everything in Absolute Superman. And where we know she's going to cross over with Batman, we don't definitively know where her story resides in relation to the existing story of Absolute Batman, which is to say, has Batman fought Bane yet? Have the two of them even met at this point in Wonder Woman's story? But I say all that to say, it's entirely possible that the reason why Steve Trevor is being recalled is because of what's going on with the message being broadcast by Lois Lane in the Absolute Superman comics, right? Where she's literally telling the world, there is a paramilitary force attacking Smallville in secret. We need help, which could potentially lead to a military strike, especially considering the fact that General Lane was killed. So here's the cool thing. With Steve Trevor walking away, it focuses on Wonder Woman having a conversation with Barbara and Gia and Etta Candy. And they kind of start putting pieces together about what's going on here with this enemy that Wonder Woman's been facing off against, right? The news is saying that thing in Reno was giving off some serious literal bad vibes. It's not another tetracide, is it? And that's where Wonder Woman's just like, no, Etta, right? I have neither experienced nor read of a creature like this before. And so where initially it's just kind of like, I mean, do we want to pack all this stuff up about Themyscira and kind of focus on that instead? Wonder Woman says no, right? We should continue. My time will never be free of interruptions. We must make the best of what we have. And so they sit back down and they start reading again. And Barbara says, it's one of the earliest suggestions of an Amazon battle. The remains of some kind of ancient sea creature were found. And the question is asked, are the remains of the Amazons? And Barbara says, no, not really, right? Which is part of the mystery. A lot of ancient weapons and armor were found, as well as some appendages, but no complete skeletons, and not a single skull. And so Wonder Woman asks, right, well then what do your scholars make of all this information? And Barbara says, there are many theories running the gamut from they never left their dead behind to they couldn't be killed at all. And so that asks the question, is Wonder Woman immortal? And are the other Amazons immortal? Now, Wonder Woman's never met her own people, so she doesn't know the answer to that question. And she knows so little about her own history that she doesn't know the answer to that question. So her guess is as good as anybody else's. But in the midst of all of this, another attack happens. And she goes after this creature yet again, this time in Uruguay, in La Paloma. And so she says, I cannot see the creature, but its destructive handiwork is obvious. And I can feel that signature darkness. It is here. If I do not act fast, they will lose their lighthouse despite their valiant efforts. And so Wonder Woman, of course, invokes some magic and saves the city as best she can by putting out all these fires that are all over the place. And so she says, the creature leaves a trail of destruction, both physical and emotional. I cannot think of any known creature that does this in such a way. And to what end? Does it seek something? So far, this all feels so random and pointless. And so that's where she locates where the creature's at, right? And she says, whatever power this creature has, it's infecting me in close proximity. I have to resist. So it's not simply just magic that this creature possesses. It's the ability to influence the emotions and the feelings of those around it, which, depending on how you want to look at it, makes it all the more dangerous, because Wonder Woman does have a warrior's madness in DC Comics, at least the main DC universe Wonder Woman. She can also experience that presumably in the Absolute universe. The problem is that once she catches up to it, it's already taken off, and so now she's lost its trail, and the whole thing continues on, right? She gets back to the Huron, only to have to go to the Dominican Republic, to go to Marina, Mexico, Waimea, Hawaii, over and over and over again, jumping from one location to the next. But here's the cool thing, is that she says, this thing is infuriating. It is impossibly strong and fast, communicates nothing, and emits the foulest dark energy the second you get near it, right? She literally says, it's bringing out the worst in me, and that's where you find out that what Etta and Gia and Barbara have been doing is researching this thing while Wonder Woman has been gone. And that's where Etta says, right, we noticed, or at least I noticed, that when you and Barbara were talking about ancient Amazon battle sites, that some of them were the same locations you've been fighting in tonight. Because she says, look, right, this place was not called La Paloma back then, but the battle site is close by, and there was a battle in Waimea and in Mexico, not far from Merida, right? And Wonder Woman asks, right, Reno? Was there a battle fought in Reno? Which, I don't know, seems kind of funny to me, right? Ancient Amazons getting in a battle over slot machines, right? But Etta says, right, not that I found, but that casino hotel that was destroyed was called Paradise Island, another name for Themyscira. And that's where Wonder Woman's like, okay, this is not a coincidence. And Etta just says, right, nothing's a coincidence. And so what ends up happening is that the four of them, Wonder Woman, Barbara, Etta, and Gia, all sit down and start making a map of battle sites, right? Putting all this information together to try to understand what's happening on a global scale. And that's where they discover there have been a lot more battle sites than have initially been broadcast. Not because anybody's keeping it secret, but seemingly because some people just don't know, or for whatever reason, they weren't able to communicate effectively to the outside world before they were destroyed. And in fact, they comment on this, right? Barbara says, Etta figured out that maybe this creature was hitting areas that were more remote, no humans to report the sightings, a reasonable assumption if unproven. And so yet another instance of an attack is broadcast, right, that is actually taking place in Delphi, Greece. And so what ends up happening is Wonder Woman transitions there, and she says, ever since I can remember, I have ached to see Greece. To get to see Delphi first feels prophetic. I'd say it's a blessing from the gods, except the malevolent force that drew me here is bent on destroying everything it touches. So perhaps not a blessing, right? And she says, this is, above all else, a sacred site of Apollo. Having any hand in its destruction will go poorly for me. And so when she encounters this creature, she simply says, let's end this quickly, shall we? And like the two of them start facing off against each other. And so it literally just starts crushing Wonder Woman. There's nothing she can do. And that's where she says, right, like, is this it? Am I defeated by a creature with no name? Was I naive to consider myself blessed and worthy? It is the darkness that whispers in your ear. And so that's where Wonder Woman starts to put two and two together, because she recalls this conversation that had taken place between Barbara and Gia Candy, where Gia says, all magic has a price, Barbara, and the kind of magic Diana does, I suspect the price is quite heavy. And Barbara asks, right, what does that mean, Gia? And Gia says it can mean all kinds of things. And so Wonder Woman, in thinking of that conversation, comes to the realization this destructive force that she is facing off against, it's her. And in fact, it's the antithesis of her. It's magic trying to balance itself, but there's actually a lot more to it than that. And so what you end up doing here is you transition to the two of them fighting one another. And Wonder Woman says, if I am right in my assessment, and I am, I can feel the truth in it. This creature exists because I exist. And the solution to that problem, destroying myself in order to destroy the creature linked to me, is untenable. It cannot be the answer. All of my life, everything leading to this moment, all being cut short by this. I will not allow it to be The end. My rage is clearly amplified by this creature's negative aura, but it is my own. I recognize the corners of me inside of it, my pride, my stubbornness, and my desire. It does seem unfair that my blows do little while it shreds me on impact. Where's the balance in that? I can affect it, but almost nothing seems to slow it. Now, this is one of those interesting things, right? Because this kind of feeds into the idea of Darkseid. We'll talk about that whole concept with him here in a minute, but this is something that DC's been doing with the Absolute Universe for quite some time. That the reality here is that in the Absolute Universe, unlike the main DC universe, superheroes and goodness as a concept is the underdog. Injustice reigns supreme. Life is inherently unfair, and life leans towards unfairness on the scales. Darkseid designed it that way, right? And so that's why Wonder Woman literally produces a bauble and casts a spell and throwing it and just says, go to sleep. And when the creature is hit, it immediately passes out. And so at that point, she says, it seems more vulnerable to magic than brute strength, but it's barely a weakness. And I don't know that I'd call that sleep. I will, at the very least, take it. And so the kicker is that while Wonder Woman is just kind of laying on the ground, recovering, she's met by a visitor. And this visitor says, wow, those eyes hit like a Mack truck. And Wonder Woman doesn't know who this is, but we do. Especially if you've been reading DC Comics for any measure of time. Why? Because the person is speaking backwards. And there's only one person in DC Comics that speaks backwards like this, Zatanna. Now, the cool thing about this is that Zatanna can speak normally if she chooses to. In the Absolute Universe, it seems like she always speaks backwards. Normally in the main DC universe, she has to talk backwards to cast her spells. Now, it's almost entirely possible that she's choosing to speak backwards because she knows it'll take time for Wonder Woman to understand it if she's really even able to process or figure out how it is that Zatanna's even talking at all. But as the two of them converse, Wonder Woman asks, right, who are you? What are you? And Zatanna just says, with my apologies, princess, Diana of Themyscira, princess of hell, daughter of Circe, last of the Amazons. I bind you to me while in my presence. Your voice is mine alone. And so at that point, Diana realizes she's creating a binding spell. And the funny thing about this is that Diana tries to go on the attack and she's overpowered instantly. She has no chance against someone like Zatanna. And that's where Zatanna says, Diana of the Wild Isle, princess of hell, daughter of Circe, last of the Amazons. I bind you to me while in my presence. Your voice is mine alone. And so repeating this spell over and over and over again, that's when Diana picks up the pieces. Oh my God, it's a binding spell, right? But the problem is that the binding spell is complete before Diana has the ability to stop it. And in fact, even when she says, I have to stop her, the spell's done, Zatanna leaves, right? She just overpowers Wonder Woman instantly. Now, we don't immediately see the fruits of those labors. This is likely going to be an element that's going to come to fruition in a future Wonder Woman story. But the cool thing about this is that once that's done, she travels back to the Huron. She's completely exhausted and totally out of it. And in fact, you know, she's asked, like, how did it go? Your energy is not what I would call successful energy. And Wonder Woman's like, indeed, right? Like I am defeated and I am exhausted. I managed to simply just stave that thing off and that's it. But she says, I have solved the puzzle of what this creature is. And she says, the answer is my death. And in fact, she actually attributes understanding what was going on directly to Gaia, based on that conversation that she flashed back to. And she says, when trying to explain magic to Etta and Barbara, Gaia noticed that it always comes with a price. This creature, it's as if this creature is the price for my existence. If you think of me as a gift to the forces of good in this world, then in magic, that demands a counter. So a gift is given to the forces of evil in this world. In this case, it seems to have formed as some kind of inverse of me, and I think it cannot be defeated so long as I exist. If I exist, it exists. But that's where the girls chime in. And again, the imbalance created by Darkseid. That one of the things they say is, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Because the reality here is the world is already in a state of imbalance. The world itself is already bent towards villainy, right? Corrupt politicians and corporations and so on running the world, the average person being kept under a boot hill. So if anything, the arrival of you as a superhero brings balance to a world that is otherwise rise painfully out of balance. So the idea of this magic somehow being a counterbalance to you tips the scales back in favor of unfairness and injustice within the world itself. And that's where Wonder Woman realizes that's her out. And then she realizes there's something bigger going on here. And so at that point, she says, okay, right, Hecate and all the goddesses, their talk is often cryptic, sometimes straight up riddles, but they nearly always note that the world is out of sync, darker than it is supposed to be, more hopeless. Justice is too rare, too fleeting. Now, one of the things that we're going to find out here, right, because we've seen the gods talk about that, right, over the course of the Absolute Wonder Woman comic, but they always kind of talk about it as if it's something outside of their sphere of control or something that they are unaware of that's causing it. And the answer is, that's true. That is an accurate statement. And so what Wonder Woman ends up doing is she actually bails out and is like, I have one last hope in being able to deal with this, right? Like one last shot in the dark. And so she takes off and she ends up going to Greece. And she says, though calling it good news feels foolish, I can sense the entity is nearby simply by the darkness of my own thoughts. Mother used to say that being around me was like being swallowed in a vortex of love and compassion, of kindness. Is this feeling the inverse of that? To call a god such as this, I will need to bleed profusely. And so she essentially instigates a conflict with this darker version of herself, and in sustaining these injuries, starts bleeding all over the place. And she says, Demeter, circle of life and mother of us all, please accept this offering of blood and pain from your devoted Diana. Use your great wisdom and power to grant me audience with Gaia. On behalf of lost daughters everywhere, accept my offering and grant me passage, which of course happens. The ground opens up beneath Diana and she goes crashing into the earth. And she says, a ripple of fear burns right through me. Gaia is no god to be trifled with. Grandmother to the gods, most mortals know. She is one of the oldest of them, and I pray that she is the wisest. And so as soon as she falls down into the realm of Gaia, Gaia starts killing her, like literally starts attacking Wonder Woman, to the point that Wonder Woman is literally begging for help and begging for aid. And at that point, Gaia starts to listen, right? Wonder Woman says, I come in supplication to you, grandmother of the gods, of us all. I humbly beseech your audience. I am in great need of your wise counsel. Should you find my words worthless, my life is yours, as all our lives are yours. And so where she literally starts to succumb to the attacks of Gaia, she says, Mother, protect me. I think I shall see you soon. Gaia stops and releases Wonder Woman. And Wonder Woman just says, thank you. And Gaia tells her, you do not belong here, Diana of Themyscira. And where Diana initially apologizes and says, I felt I had no choice, that Gaia says, humans are quick to say that. I hear your request, but I cannot help you. The world has sought to correct the imbalance that you bring, and I cannot object to that. And that's where Wonder Woman says, with respect, goddess, I feel the world has been tricked. And Gaia gets pissed. Right? Diana says, I would never lie to a god, but I do choose my words with care, because gods hate to be tricked. And Diana says, with respect, goddess, the world is not in balance. The existence of me and others like me is long overdue. And even with us, any balance is a long way from being restored. There is imbalance in this world, goddess, but I do not believe I am the aberration. If you take a closer look for yourself, I think that you will see. And that's where Gaia says, it's bold of you to suggest that you know better than I, as I am the world. And Diana tells her, sometimes, goddess, the closer you are to something, the harder it is to see. And so Gaia, in turn, looks out at the entire world. And this fits very neatly into the kind of Greek god mythos that we're traditionally used to, either in the world itself or within Wonder Woman's comics in the main DC universe, which is to say, oftentimes gods ignore what goes on in the world around them, right? That they are a part of the world, but separate from it at the same time, because the goings on of human beings is really more for something of interest and intrigue, right? Kind of curious creatures to watch whenever they feel like doing it, as opposed to having any real love or concern for them. But that's where Gaia looks out into the world and she sees the events of absolute Batman, absolute Superman. She sees nuclear wars that have gone on. She sees corporations polluting and corrupting the world, right? All kinds of different issues. And so that's where she says, you are right, Diana of Themyscira. Something is wrong with the world, and has been for a very long time, maybe since the very beginning. There is a darkness I do not quite understand. Raise your eyes to me, princess of hell, and stand. Now this is the most important part of it all, because what this is saying is Darkseid really is the one manipulating everything. More so than that, it actually sets in line the fact that Wonder Woman is going to fight Darkseid, because Gaia tells her, you will fight this darkness. And Wonder Woman says, yes, goddess. And she says, you will give your life in my name. And Wonder Woman says, with pleasure. And Gaia says, so be it, and sends Wonder Woman back to the surface. So at that point, she's now bound to the authority of another god. She has told Gaia she will fight whatever this darkness is. They don't know that it's Darkseid. Wonder Woman is learning that it's Darkseid, and you and I know that it is Darkseid. And so she, while she doesn't know that she's going to be sacrificing her life, or will be asked to sacrifice her life in facing off against Darkseid, she will. And so that's where Wonder Woman says, the trip back is certainly easier. I have placed myself in the hands of the goddess. Let us now see what exactly will come of it. Because when she's sent back to the surface, Gaia literally just grabs the evil version of Wonder Woman and just yanks her down into the ground, right? And takes her out just like that. And so this twisted version of Diana is effectively gone, right? Just basically being unmade. At that point, she transitions back to the Huron. And at that point, Steve Trevor is just kind of watching all these monitors that exist out there. And Diana asks him, right? She's like, Steve. And of course, the two of them greet each other as friends, like, hey, I'm glad you're back. Well, I'm glad you're okay after everything that you had to go through. And he's like, do you want to talk about it? And she's like, the creature's gone, destroyed by Gaia. And Steve's just kind of like Gaia of the Earth, like Mother Earth. And Diana's just like, yeah, the one and only. And Steve's like, Jesus, I didn't even know that was a thing. It's cool to see Steve Trevor learning about all this stuff for the first time. But Wonder Woman also says, I may have been cursed by a beautiful witch. I wish she told me her name because she seemed to know so much of mine. But what Steve tells her is he says, I had some interesting meetings with the military while you were away. It's going to be a problem, Diana. And that's where she just says, like we knew it would be, one thing at a time. Speaking of which, did you have any success with the jump drive my maze scientist left for us? And that's where Steve says, I did. There is a lot of information here about you, more than I would have expected, but there's more details on the Batman, Superman, and the others. And so now Diana is learning about Batman and Superman. And so that's where she tells Steve, right, turn the sound back on, because what's been broadcast is catching her attention. And the broadcast says, in Gotham City, a strange burning mark left on the wall near the latest victim. And Steve asks Diana, right, is that what I think it is? And she says, yes, it's the mark of Hecate. So now the journey of Wonder Woman is going to take her to Gotham City, which is when the crossover happens between Absolute Wonder Woman and Absolute Batman in the next issue. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Thank you all for watching. I will catch you all later. Peace.